Hi, Scott.
Good
Good morning.
morning. How are you? How are you,
I'm
Sally?
good, thanks. For those of you who don't know Scott, where have you been? Where have you been, Scott? Scott is a great member of the Montreal community. Um, Today we're chatting. We're doing this video series for some of you who've heard, because tomorrow's workplace today, we had to, like everything else, kind of just adapt to what's going on with the world today. And our way of adapting is going with the flow. We don't know when our next tomorrow's workplace today event will be. But in the meantime, we absolutely want to keep the conversation going about things that matter to us. Scott was a big part of the first Tomorrow's Workplace Today event. We had it at Concordia downtown, and he brought in his team and did these amazing exercises to bring us back to neutrality between sessions. We did some yoga at lunchtime. And he really kind of just resonated with us into why does it matter to introspect and breathe. You know, it's as simple as breathing. So Scott, today we want to talk about a few things, but you know what? I'm going to start really high level, and it's a weird question, but I'm sure it's going to get us talking. Who are you today, and what brought you here?
Wow, that'll definitely get us talking. Hopefully, this won't be a too long-winded answer. I'm a health servant, is kind of the way I see it. At Organik, we call ourselves health concierge, like a one-stop wellness shop. But in terms of myself, I'm at the service of health, which means I serve health, and by serving health, I'm able to serve health to other people. My mission is to inspire a daily practice of health, which means that by inspiring, by breathing in my practice, which is anywhere between half an hour to 3 hours a day or whatever, depending on the day, by inspiring my practice, I feel that with my presence and just the side effects of that practice, I inspire it in other people. And my kind of one of my dreams is that 7 billion people take 5 conscious breaths every single day. I think that's kind of the foundation of optimal health. So I want to inspire people to start with a daily conscious breathing practice. And I think if everybody did that, kind of like the Dalai Lama said, that if at 8 years old we learned how to learn mindfulness meditation in one generation, there'd be no war. I truly feel that if everybody took 5 conscious breaths out of the 20,000 we take per day, it would be a very different landscape. Especially, if we're looking at 2020, which is a quite a scary landscape or an inspiring one, depending on how you look at it. But it's kind of all over the place, and I think it would be very different if we had a daily conscious breathing practice. So that's kind of what I'm showing up with today, is hopefully to inspire people to take the power back, take their health back, and start practicing daily.
I love that. And you know what? This is so relevant because one of the things that we were absolutely going to address this year at Tomorrow's Workplace Today is the 1 degree of change, and how it only takes 1 degree to go from hot water to steam, or boiling water, or steam to, sorry, whatever, the
Yeah,
1%, right?
we get it.
So having said that, you mentioned, the 5 minutes of meditation or whatever it may be. What do you think triggered that change in you, Scott? And it could have been when you were 5 or 10 or whatever, last year, for all we know. But it took kind of one trigger that brought you on this path. And do you remember it? Is there a moment that you want to kind of discuss?
Yeah, I totally remember it, and it's part of my personal story and journey. Not to go into too much detail, but I did at my late teen years, due to all kinds of stuff in my family and whatever that I was going through, like a lot of teenage years, we're navigating through a lot of different emotions and growth and growing pains. And anyway, I started to party a lot and ended up at like a treatment center slash sort of drug rehab, however you want to see it. Not like too intense, but just kids that were in CEGEP that were going down the wrong path. And I spent 3 months in nature. And I remember going into that process, and sort of my inner fire was out. I was very outgoing all my life, and I just didn't have an interest in life anymore. And I came out of that experience, And with it, I didn't have the wording at that point because I was like 20, but I guess we could say it was a spiritual experience, a holistic experience. But I tasted something in nature, and I often say that health is not a belief; it is an experience. And when I came out, the fire was back, my outgoing energy was back, and I knew that my mission at that point was to offer people authentic, deep experiences that would transform their lives. And it took me a while. It took me about 10 years of back and forth with drugs and alcohol to really regain the mastery over my health. And I think it was because of the philosophy in that foundation was to stop the drugs, stop the alcohol, stop the addictions. And when I was about 27, 28, I sort of reversed that and said, it's not working. You're having trouble with that. How about reversing it and starting health, and get addicted to health? And at that point, now they call it the minimal viable practice, which is the MVP. What's your minimal viable practice? But I just started with very, very small practices around yoga, around breathing, about running, around push-ups and stuff. And I said, if people can get addicted to cigarettes or drugs and alcohol by doing it on a daily basis, even if it's just 5 minutes a day or whatever, I think I can get addicted to health. And that's exactly what happened. And my life became so healthy that it was really easy to stop the drugs and the alcohol, which was really, really hard to do. But coming from a stance and a posture of, rooted in a daily practice, it made choosing health that much easier. So that was the tipping point, I guess. And still to the day, that experience of coming out when I was 20 years old, out of 3 months in nature in Latsuk, with no electricity and on a lake every single day, that's still kind of my anchor point of what authentic, true, integrated health feels like.
Perfect. And it's so accurate. I mean, hearing that story resonates on so many levels, whether someone has had or hasn't had addictions. We've all gone through moments in our lives like that where we just didn't feel like ourselves anymore. So how do we, again, reroute and re-authenticate and find ourselves? I think, like you said, in teenage years, it's so hard to even know who ourselves are. So it'd be good to start earlier with exercises to enable our children to
Mm.
understand, what is the rooted you and how do you get to that?
Yeah. Don't get me going on the education system this morning. We'll keep that for another podcast or another
Well,
interview.
you know what? I'm committing to you. We're going to have that conversation another time for sure.
Cool.
Scott, it's clear you're saying today who I am not necessarily isn't who you were. You've kind of always been this person, but you've certainly migrated and changed components about your life to make you who you are today. And how do you think that plays out in all the different aspects of your life? How do you bring that to business, relationships, whatever it is that you're involved in? How do you bring that Scott, and how does it resonate?
So I love share the practice, and that's kind of my philosophy. So coming back to that practice, when I show up and I'm pitching a new client, like a big business with 500 to 10,000 employees or whatever, the way I prepare for that pitch now is I'll practice maybe an extra half hour that morning, or if I'm giving a conference, my first conference I gave in 2006, I think, or seven, I had 75 slides and I was super stressed out and I was very dependent and I was hiding behind the slides and I didn't know my content well enough. Now, how I prepare is I'll practice once again, maybe an extra half hour, and I show up and maybe I have some notes beside me just to make sure my ego doesn't freak out. But I once again share the practice. And when I teach meditation, I teach yoga. I can't share more than how much I'm practicing. So Organik, my company, is a lifestyle. And sometimes that's a bit overwhelming to have a company that's a wellness lifestyle, because it's really hard to disconnect. When I go to a yoga class, am I going for myself? Am I going to see if the teacher's great or what type of sequence? Because pretty much everything I do is organic, and it's hard for me to disconnect. But at the same time, it's beautiful because it is a lifestyle that feeds my individuation, that feeds my emotional literacy, that feeds my authenticity, my integrity, and challenges me if I'm off. There's a deep resonance that I feel with my meditation practice, especially my yoga practice and stuff like that. And Organik will not let me cope with any dissonance. So I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm far from that, but I'll feel very, very quickly if I'm off a bit in my thinking, or how I treated somebody, or how somebody treated me, or anything around the values around Organik, or the work that I do, the community work that I do. More and more my life, and I love posture. I'm really starting to feel a nice posture where kind of like the vertebrae that are going one over the other, I'm starting to feel that posture, and it's becoming more and more natural, where I just need to show up and shine and share the practice. But that comes from the daily commitment, and I feel it if I skip some days that I'm not, it rarely happens, but I just don't show up and shine in the same way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of
Whether it did or it
came
didn't.
up.
Lovely answer. But it led me to another thought that I think I really want to address. One thing that came up amongst our team when we were talking about this event is that one of the major changes we're seeing our teams be affected by is Zoom fatigue to a certain extent, right? And not just Zoom fatigue. I think that as you can see, my desk is in my bedroom. So it's been hard. Like you said, you are struggling to kind of disassociate, which you don't want to, from Organik, because it is a lifestyle company. But for some of us, it has certainly been hard to separate work from home, since work is in our home now. So I was wondering if, for any of our listeners, do you have any tips to enable employees, members, whomever, to disconnect, or to not disconnect, but to find a balance between being a parent, a boyfriend, a wife, a person, versus showing up to work every day and accomplishing some tasks?
It's funny because I'm very counter current in a sense, because I from 2006 until 2020 I'd always worked from home. And when you work from home, the kitchen table becomes your desk, and then the desk becomes the kitchen table, and then the extra room becomes the boardroom or whatever, and then work and home and work and play and all this become intertwined, and there's no distinction where if you're going to an office from 9 to 5 or whatever, and you leave the office, of course you're bringing work back in your mind, let's say, but there is a cutoff.
Yeah.
When it's your own business, it's pretty much 168 hours a week, 7 days, especially in the type of work that I'm in, where it's really purpose driven. And as I mentioned, the lifestyle. So it can be hard to disconnect from. And it's funny because in February, March, we were going to have offices at the Palais des Congrès, where the concierge mieux-être du Palais des Congrès. So I was, for the first time in my life, going to go have an office. And then yeah. COVID comes and everybody has to go back home. So I'm very used to it. I don't have an exact answer to it. Because I haven't figured it out, because it can be very overwhelming to have a home office. I know that for sure, at least myself, sometimes go to a coffee shop, even though these days that's hard to do, get out and go for a walk, schedule in breath breaks or health breaks or movement breaks. Go and now, even though it's through a screen, you're still going to be looking at a screen, but take an online class or something like that. Connect with a colleague, talk to somebody, because isolation, and when you're in work mode and there's no distinction, the mind can really kick in. And when you're sitting down for a long time, pretty much when you're sitting down for more than 20 minutes, you go back to your reptilian brain, which is a fight or flight freeze brain. And it's all about life or death situation and survival and stuff. So when you're sitting down there day in, day out, and if things are going well, it's great. But if there are any forms of stress or anxiety, which is part of the pandemic at the moment, you can get into stinking thinking, you can get into judgment, you can get into reaction. And sometimes people aren't even aware of that. And you can get out of it so quickly. Like one conscious breath brings you from the reptilian brain to the neocortex, the much more evolved human brain, which is where you find the executive functioning. And that's where you want to be, especially if you're an entrepreneur, an employee. Movement is another thing, just getting up and moving, a nice glass of water. Because we're looking at the screen so much, we're not blinking anymore, like, or much less,
Yeah.
so just closing your eyes, and 80% of the information that goes into your nervous system comes through the eyes. So there are little things that you can do to tap back into the sophistication of the human body. The body was not made to sit. On average, it was, before COVID, it was about 11 hours a day. About 5 years ago, when I looked at the stats, it was about 9. So it's really going up. I imagine through COVID, we're up to maybe 12 or 13. That's horrible for the body. So little things like moving, breathing, talking to somebody else, like a human being, not about work, and especially getting outside if there's sun or fresh air. And it just, sometimes you need to schedule it into your day, or else you won't, because you'll just sit there and it's like 6 o'clock in the afternoon, or in the afternoon, let's say in the evening, and you haven't moved all day. And that's horrible for the entire system of the body.
I love that. And it's, in the end of the day, it's about being intentional. So when you say schedule it in, it's the intention to do good for your body. And I'll be fully honest, full disclosure, I walked away as a host of Tomorrow's Workplace Today a few years ago, um, very affected by you, Scott. And I brought back to our enterprise the idea of Wellness Wednesdays. And we started within the office to do 15-minute meditations at like 10:15 on Wednesdays. And I really thought, to a certain extent, I was like, no one's going to show up to this. And I'm pretty sure about like 25 people showed up the first day, sat down on a piece of the couch somewhere, closed their eyes, and did a YouTube meditation. And they kept coming back afterwards. So I think it's about being intentional. It's about knowing that you need to step away for a few minutes, kind of gather your thoughts again, give yourself a break. So I love everything that you've mentioned. Absolutely.
And not to go too deep into the psychology of it, but it's also very, very quickly we can create new pathways in the mind or get stuck. And when we're in that reptilian brain for a long time, we can feel that it's leading the show, and the monkey brain, or whatever we want to call it, that voice in the head that judges and criticizes, is a very good servant, but it's not the leader. And that's why it's so important to get that minimal viable practice, or to schedule it in, because we have this habit of procrastinating, of snoozing, of pushing off to the next day. And when we're stuck at home and we feel we need to work constantly and it's in our face, and how do we get away from it? If we don't schedule it in, that little practice, and actually if you schedule it in and you don't do it, you're feeding that beast, you're feeding that voice every single time. So initially, this minimal viable practice, when you're at home and you're scheduling your thing in, it's really not about the health. It's about regaining mastery over your own power over that voice, and not feeding that more negative fight, flight, freeze, life or death voice. So just a little reminder of those people that even if it's a 5-minute thing, when that alarm goes off, make sure you do it. Not because I want to get healthier, just because you don't want to feed the beast, that inner voice that can really start to take over and dominate our lives very, very quickly if we give it just a bit of space.
You're absolutely right. And it just brings up the topic of mental health that we've all been so focused on to a certain extent with COVID. We knew it was going to affect all of us, but somehow we tend to think it's going to affect our neighbor, and we kind of forget about ourselves in the process. So it's absolutely, I love that point, Scott. It's so important to mention it. I actually want to wrap it up, but I want to wrap it up by giving you a platform to tell us a little bit more about Organik, because we haven't talked about it. And I think everybody needs to know what you, Scott, do with Organik and how you can benefit all those enterprises out there.
Yeah. Quickly, it's a company I started in 2006. 15 years later now, we define ourselves as wellness concierge for a company. So it's like a one-stop wellness shop. Before COVID, it was yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, Qigong, nutritionist, osteo, massage, conferences, health breaks, anything that would make employees healthier at work. So the expert would actually go into the company where there were employees in the company, and we'd offer the service. And the thinking is that people are working 40 to 60 hours a week out of the 168 hours in a week, and they're not investing 1 minute in their health during that work space. So of course it's going to lead to all the chronic fatigue, burnout, depression and stuff. So we hopefully want to make that accessible. On the 12th of March, I think I saw my whole entire business model go from 100 miles an hour to zero, and literally in 5 or 6 hours, we lost pretty much all our services. So we pivoted very, very quickly to an online offering of a virtual wellness studio that employers can offer their employees. We have about 20 classes per week now for the employee, but also kids, their children. And we're looking into the parents of the employees as well. So it's like a wellness studio for the family that's in a remote, on télétravail, working from home. And which is kind of exciting because it's much more impactful. It's much more scalable as a business model. So my entrepreneur spirit finds it exciting that this is happening. Of course, I don't want COVID to, I didn't want COVID to happen, but we've got a very proactive solution, I feel, to employees that are at home and employers that don't know how to make health and wellness accessible to them when they're at home, because often they don't have the space or the gym or whatever, the home gym. But with our team of experts, we can make that much more accessible for them. So that's kind of Organik. It's really a one-stop wellness shop for corporate health. And I'd love to help any company out there make their employees that much healthier, and their company that much healthier.
Absolutely. And I vouch for you, but we're going to go ahead and post the link to your website with this video. And if anybody has any questions directly to Scott or myself, feel free. We're tagged in this post as well. And we'd be happy to chat. Scott, we're wrapping it up, but we're going to chat again. I think we've got 1,001 topics that we want to talk about again. So stay tuned, everyone. This is going to happen again with Scott, and have a good day.
Yeah.